Autumn in Princeton was crisp, but in Lecture Hall 214 of the Mathematics Department, the air was heavy with anticipation. Professor Douglas Pearson, a man known for his sharp wit and ruthless academic standards, stood at the front of the room, chalk in hand, preparing to begin the semester. This was his favorite moment, the first lecture, the day he set the rules, the day he determined who was worthy of his course, and who would be gone before the first midterm. "Welcome to hell," he would say every year, relishing the nervous glances exchanged among students. But today was different. Something was off. A strange energy filled the room, a mixture of excitement and disbelief. In the back row, a hushed conversation buzzed, drawing Pearson's irritated gaze. And then he saw him, a man in his 50s, with a distinctive hairstyle and a smirk that suggested he already owned the place. Elon Musk. For a brief moment, Pearson thought it was a joke. Some bizarre prank? A new celebrity trend? Billionaires signing up for university courses just for fun? But the way Musk sat, composed, confident, completely unbothered, told him otherwise. Pearson crossed his arms. "Mr. Musk, is it? May I ask what brings you to my humble class?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. A few students chuckled. Many of them, especially the younger, more radical members of the anti-capitalist movement, were already eager to see Musk humiliated. Musk merely shrugged. "Math is the foundation of everything," he replied casually. "I just wanted to refresh my knowledge." More laughter rippled through the room. "Refresh? Oh, of course," Pearson sneered. "Well, let's hope you can keep up." Musk said nothing. He simply nodded. Pearson turned back to the board. "Let's start with something simple," he announced, confident that he was about to put the arrogant billionaire in his place. "Who here can explain why the Navier-Stokes equation remains an unsolved problem in mathematics?" Silence. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Pearson knew this question would stump most of them. Then, to his surprise, Musk raised his hand. Pearson almost laughed. "Oh, this should be good. Let's hear what the billionaire has to say." Musk folded his hands on the desk and spoke. "The Navier-Stokes equation is a system of differential equations, describing the motion of viscous fluids. The problem lies in the fact that exact, analytical solutions are generally unavailable. One of the key challenges is proving the existence and smoothness of solutions in three-dimensional space, particularly at high Reynolds numbers when turbulence begins to dominate." He continued, his voice steady, his explanations precise. And as he spoke, the energy in the room shifted. The students who had laughed just moments ago were now listening intently, their expressions turning from amusement to astonishment. Pearson felt his throat go dry. He had expected Musk to falter, to make a mistake. But he didn't. Thus, in the absence of a formal proof, we are left with only numerical approximations and computational models. Musk finished with a slight shrug. The room was dead silent. Outside, a bird chirped. Pearson clenched the chalk in his hand. "Well, Mr. Musk," he said slowly, "it seems you know a little more than I expected." And just like that, the battle of intellect had begun. Professor Pearson wasn't the type to back down. He had spent his entire career dismantling overconfident students, and today would be no different. The fact that Elon Musk, one of the wealthiest men alive, had just embarrassed him in front of his own class only fueled his determination. He turned back to the board, his mind racing. Fine. Musk had handled one question, but anyone could memorize theories. Pearson needed to test his ability to think under pressure. "All right," he said, forcing a smile. "Since Mr. Musk is so well-versed in unsolved problems, let's try something a bit more practical." He swiftly wrote a complex integral across the board, its symbols twisting like a mathematical labyrinth. "This," he said, stepping aside, "is a problem that has stumped many students before you. It requires more than just knowledge. It requires intuition, creativity, and the ability to think beyond formulas." The students leaned forward, some whispering bets on how long it would take Musk to fail. Pearson folded his arms. "Well, Mr. Musk?" Musk stood up, adjusting his jacket, and walked toward the board with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The room held its breath. Musk stared at the equation for a moment, running his fingers along his chin. "Interesting," he muttered. "This reminds me of an optimization problem I faced at Tesla." A few students scoffed. "Oh, really?" Pearson smirked. "And how exactly does a multivariable integral remind you of making cars?" Musk didn't even look at him. He picked up a piece of chalk and began writing. "The key," he said, "is not to attack it head-on. People overcomplicate these things. If you look at it from a different perspective." His hand moved rapidly, breaking the problem down into simpler components. He rewrote terms, substituted variables, and within minutes, the equation had transformed into something elegant, something solvable. Then, in one final stroke, he wrote the answer. Silence. Pearson felt his stomach drop. The math checked out. It was flawless. A murmur spread through the students. A few even clapped. Musk turned around, casually tossing the chalk onto the ledge. I think that does it. Pearson's jaw tightened. This wasn't supposed to happen. He needed to regain control. Impressive, he admitted through gritted teeth. But mathematics isn't just about solving equations. It's about pushing boundaries. So let's push them, shall we? He turned back to the board and began writing furiously. If you're so confident, Mr. Musk, let's see if you can handle a challenge that I designed. The symbols stretched further, equations growing longer, the complexity increasing with every line. This time, he wasn't just throwing a difficult problem at Musk. He was constructing a mathematical minefield, an unsolvable puzzle. Musk crossed his arms, watching with quiet amusement. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. I'd like to take a shot at it. The room turned. Sitting near the middle of the hall was a young woman, her glasses reflecting the light from the projector. She had been silent the entire class, but now she was leaning forward, eyes locked onto the board. Pearson raised an eyebrow. And you are? Ada Cohen, she said, grad student in applied mathematics. She glanced at Musk. Mind if I help out? Musk grinned. By all means. Pearson stepped back. This was about to get interesting. Ada Cohen stood up confidently and walked toward the board. The lecture hall fell silent. No one expected anyone else to dare challenge Professor Pearson, especially after Elon Musk had just effortlessly dismantled his previous problem. Pearson crossed his arms, watching her with mild disdain. Well, Miss Cohen, he said, stepping aside, if you think you can solve this equation, go ahead. Ada picked up a piece of chalk and carefully studied the long strings of formulas that Pearson had written on the board. Her eyes darted between the variables, integrals, and equations as if she were mentally breaking the problem apart, piece by piece. Interesting, she murmured. Musk tilted his head, observing her. What's your plan? He asked. Ada smirked slightly. The professor created a problem that appears unsolvable, but only if you think about it in a conventional way. If we change the coordinate system, it simplifies. Pearson scoffed. Oh, really? Let's see it then. Ada quickly began writing on the board. If we substitute these variables and apply the Lagrangian method, the complex system reduces to a more manageable form. She performed several transformations, then glanced at Musk. Want to finish it? Musk grinned, grabbed another piece of chalk, and instantly followed her train of thought. The two worked together seamlessly, as if they had rehearsed this before. Their hands moved swiftly. Symbols appeared one after another, and the equations lost their intimidating complexity, transforming into an elegant solution. In less than 3 minutes, Musk placed the final dot and stepped back. Done. A heavy silence filled the lecture hall. Pearson stared at the board in shock. The answer was correct. A few students in the back rows started clapping. Others exchanged glances, trying to process what had just happened. Pearson frowned. This is impossible, he muttered. It's possible, Musk replied with a smirk. You just lacked the imagination. The professor's anger shifted to bewilderment. He had spent years challenging students, proving his intellectual superiority. He knew Musk was a genius. But for him to solve such a complex problem so effortlessly, and with a mere graduate student? Ada wiped the chalk dust from her hands and turned to Pearson. Your problems are difficult, Professor, but they can be solved if you think outside the box. Pearson opened his mouth but found nothing to say. Musk chuckled. I think that's enough for today, Professor. Thanks for the lesson. He turned to Ada and extended his hand. Great work. Have you ever thought about working at Tesla or SpaceX? Ada blinked in surprise. Are you serious? Absolutely. We need people who aren't afraid of unconventional thinking. The lecture hall gasped. This was an opportunity most students could only dream of. Ada looked at Pearson, who was still processing the moment, then back at Musk. I'll think about it. Good. Musk nodded. Just don't take too long. He turned and walked toward the exit. Ada remained standing at the board, realizing that this day had just changed her life. And Pearson silently watched it all unfold. For the first time in his career, he had failed to put a student in their place. More than that, a student had put him in his. Professor Pearson pressed his lips together, trying to hide his frustration. What had just happened in the lecture hall defied his logic. He had built his entire career on belittling students with his intellect, proving their insignificance before the great world of science. And now, standing before him were two people, a billionaire upstart and an ordinary graduate student, and his authority had crumbled in an instant. Musk, as if nothing had happened, glanced at his wristwatch, as if checking whether he was late for his next meeting, and smirked. Professor, you might want to reconsider your teaching method. Humiliating students is not the best way to teach them mathematics. Pearson crossed his arms over his chest, but his voice was no longer as confident. I was just testing how far a student's thought can go. It was a kind of test, Ada smirked. So it turns out you didn't pass it yourself. The audience laughed, but no one dared laugh too loudly. Musk nodded and turned to Pearson. I understand that this is a blow to you. You're used to considering yourself an unquestionable authority. But the reality is that knowledge doesn't belong to just one person. Science progresses thanks to those who are willing to doubt, seek new paths, and admit that they can be wrong. And you. He looked around the audience and then back at the professor. You keep students in fear, making them afraid of mistakes, instead of inspiring them to search for the truth. Pearson tensed but couldn't find a suitable response. Ada subtly nodded. That's why many people hate mathematics. You make it a tool of pressure, not a means of knowledge. Musk clapped his hands to get the students' attention. By the way, who among you would like to try solving real-world problems? No pressure, no fear, just for curiosity and the benefit of humanity? Some students whispered to each other with interest. The professor squinted. You have no right to recruit my students. Musk smirked. What if they want it themselves? He looked at Ada. I already made her an offer, but that doesn't mean she's the only one deserving of this opportunity. He scanned the audience again. I want the best minds working on problems that really matter. If any of you feel like you can contribute, find me. Pearson was furious. He could feel his grip on the students slipping away. He knew that if he didn't do something now, his authority would be shattered forever. You're just a billionaire with a savior complex. Musk nodded. Maybe, but this billionaire built companies that change the world. And you? What have you taught these students, besides the fear of making mistakes? Pearson clenched his fists but knew he had lost. He looked at Ada, then at the students, and for the first time in his life, felt like an outsider in his own lecture hall. Musk checked his wristwatch once more. All right, I have a meeting. Ada, if anything, my secretary will contact you. He turned and walked out of the lecture hall, leaving behind only silence and a professor who, for the first time in many years, felt like a student rather than a teacher.